Cornelius Price's grave. I mean, now, what went on in the background there? Because we were told that it was going to happen in Balbriggan. I was getting phone calls all the time where is it on? Do you know where it's on? Then there was some relative that was saying it's definitely on in Ireland. And all of a sudden it happened in the UK, and it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, they put a video was put out by supporters of Cornelius Price on TikTok welcoming the body home and all of this, but it seems it was misdirection.
Home to where?
Home to North County Dublin.
To Gormanstown?
Yeah, well, North County Dublin anyway.
Yeah, there was, I think, a bit of deliberate misinformation. He was never going to go to Balbriggan because the grave of Benny Whitehouse is there, one of the people he's suspected to have ordered killed. So, I mean, that would have been, just a horrendous from either family's point of view to have, two people in the one graveyard. It would just lead to more friction. And you have to remember that even the Whitehouse family, there's members of that family who are married into the Price family. I mean, they are interrelated. So, I mean, that was taken.
Messy at Christmas.
That was taken. Yeah, well, I'd say it's messy. It's messy at on All Souls Day or whenever people go to the graveyards as well. And there was talk about he does also have relatives buried in Glasnevin, I've been told as well, and that was a possibility at one stage. But I think some members of the family, despite the reputation of Cornelius Price, some members of the family are, quite reasonable characters, I'm told, and I think they kind of felt, look, there's a need to kind of put an end to this, in terms of it, we don't an entire circus, or if there was going to be a circus, it was to be at their. It was going to be their circus and not anyone else's. They didn't necessarily want the media there or rival clans turning up. But as we know now, like we've seen the Lamborghinis and the floral. So it was a circus, but it was their one.
And the Sunday World appeared on the grave.
Now that, of course, the WhatsApp was going mad when that little video came up. So who took the video at the graveside? No media were there.
No media were there during the service, so it was taken by. It was put up on social media by people who were there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously there was a number of floral tributes on the grave, including a bottle of Captain Morgan's. There was a handgun in Dun and Flowers, but there was also a mocked up version of the Sunday World, copyright not given in advance.
Yeah.
But obviously with a more favourable headline, I think, saying that Mr. Price was a legend in his time, not yet to be published in the Sunday World in that form.
Simply the best. Cornelius Price was the headline. You can see here.
But yeah, obviously the Sunday World logo is there. So, look.
That's an extraordinary. We've never seen one of those before, have we?
I don't think so.
Front page. I mean, front pages of the Sunday World are usually,
not embraced,
mocked up, shall we say, for when people are leaving, or when there's a big birthday or something like that on, and then of course the desk jockeys go to town on
doing up a mock for 40th birthdays or whatever.
Things like that. But
so look,
but that's the first gangster who's actually embraced that it's a time. Look, the three Lamborghinis, right, led the funeral cortege, and of course Rochdale is in Manchester, an area of Manchester that is. I think it's a fairly underprivileged area, Rochdale, and it seems to have had its troubles over the years. The Lamborghinis led the funeral cortege. There was absolutely everything you could imagine. And the mourners were burying what they called a king, golden balls, which is a different thing altogether, and a legend. And they call him, of course, Nailyboy. The Captain Morgan's rum, we all know he liked that because in 2020, when Robbie Lawler was murdered up in Belfast, he took to social media himself. I mean, that was kind of coming towards the end of when he had good health, and he toasted Lawler's death. Yeah.
I mean, I think the funerals have become increasingly important in gangland circles. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. We over the years, Eamon, we would have gone and got pictures secretly, but almost without exception now, they're being broadcast really in social media and recorded very professionally, put up as kind of, I suppose, a testament to the people that have died. It's a change in culture, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, even like David Byrne's funeral after the Regency shooting, I mean, that was a real marker. Like that was, we know that members of the Byrne organised crime gang were ordered to turn up. They wore a uniform. I mean, it was all but a paramilitary style uniform. There was the string of limousines. It was all about projecting power and, within their community and showing that, we're still strong, and Daniel Kinahan turning up, despite having narrowly escaped death just, a short time previously, is still, confident enough to walk the streets of Dublin. So, I mean, that was a real key kind of aspect of it, is to kind of show power. And you see that even with Cornelius Price. There's an element of, the people still spinning on social media. They're talking about him being a great dad and a great uncle and a great father and all the rest of it. And it's all about, creating their own narrative and not leaving it up just to the Sunday world or to their rivals who are equally gloating on. They were putting stuff up on social media. I mean, we had the video that was taken by the Christian preacher of Cornelius Price, on the ventilator, literally in the last few hours of his life. And you had rivals, pretty much gloating, like, you're making fun of him that,
as he was dying.
As he was dying. So, I mean, you can see why, people want to create their own narrative around, somebody's death.
They're taking ownership, essentially, of the reportage of it. And they're also, though, showing the wealth, aren't they? I mean, these funerals, if you could call them bling, is what they are. I mean, it's the cars, it's the horses, it's the lone pipers, it's the lines of young guys dressed similar. It's that mafia style thing. Look how much money I earned.
Yeah, look how much money I earned. And also, like, unusually you see sort of people are projecting cheerful scenes as well, where it becomes this sort of celebration of the life. And of course, that's how the family are entitled to remember people. That's their business. But there is a kind of an embrace of that culture, that it's certainly the days of people hiding their faces as they walked into a gangland funeral. Those are just not happening anymore at this moment.
I mean, we've always loved a good funeral in Ireland. I mean, people talk about, that was a great funeral. It was great crack, and everyone had a few drinks and laughed about, the person who passed away. I mean, and they've always been politicised in Ireland. I mean, Terence McSweeney, who went on hunger strike in London in 1920 and died, that became a huge kind of shift in the political kind of climate in Ireland in 1920. So, I mean, from way back, and again, it was always politicised by, the provisional, Republican movement and, the official Republican movement and all the rest of it. They use that all the time. And we've even seen that recently, with members of the real IRA and people, creating firing parties, which again is all about projecting power and making it look like you've got something useful going on here.
I was actually in the Jeep driving it actually for the first anniversary of Alan Ryan's death. Now, at his actual funeral, do you remember the shots were let off and there was murder over that? But the anniversary was as big. It was unbelievable. Don't know how we managed it, but we were driving along and ended up like surrounded by all these women and men in uniform marching, obviously the paramilitary uniform or whatever, and they were all walking alongside us. We were completely engulfed actually in it, but there was thousands at it. It was quite extraordinary, and they were remembering what they said was a martyr.
It's a way, I think, to get that message across. I mean, even the funeral of Bobby Storey, who was a renowned IRA man turned peacemaker, according to some, at the very least, that's a display of strength and a display of community strength. It's I've been at the funerals and they're kind of contradictory. I remember being at a funeral in Ballyfermot of two brothers who were shot dead, and the priest was speaking in sort of general terms about the effects of gangland crime. And I remember their sister getting up, walking up to the altar and basically saying, time to let that drop. Get back on message.
Say that reasonably, or was...
Well, she said it reasonably, and the priest spoke afterwards saying he wasn't told to shut up.
Okay.
But, it was mid-service.
You see, and of course the church are somewhat compromised in these situations, isn't it? I mean, you're talking about that preacher that was with Cornelius Price when he was dying, this evangelical preacher. He spoke at the graveside, and he spoke about... I see there a note that his name was Reverend Alex Johnson. He said that Cornelius Price's heart was changed through the compassion of God. Now, I do think his victims, suspected victims' families wouldn't believe that. He went to his grave without, I suppose, revealing the whereabouts in particular of the couple, Willie Mum and his girlfriend, Anna Verslave.
Well, he's been in a coma since late 2021. So, like, I mean, if he's doing any religious conversions, like, it happened in his head. Look, it's a bit ridiculous to have come out with that. And I think, I spoke to Willie Maughan, and he took a fairly Christian point of view. He said, well, let's hope he has converted. But he said, I don't think that's true. He doubts it very much. And and they're very much still left hanging. I mean, they're a family left grieving. And they would like to know what happened to Willie Maughan and his girlfriend Anna.
You kind of hope now, don't you, because that he's passed away, that the fear maybe that Cornelius Price held over people, that maybe with the passage of time, a little bit of time, somebody might come forward and maybe lead police to where they've been buried.
And I actually think that might have fed into the reason why Cornelius Price was buried in the UK, in that there was a strong possibility some people at that funeral were fearing that they were going to get arrested if they came back to Ireland, because they don't know if anyone has broken ranks. I mean, is it 12 or is it 13 people who were supposed to be in the Gormanstown yard that day when that couple disappeared? They're not all close relatives. Some of them are they're less closer than others, and they're not really part of the gang anymore. So there has to be a real fear that some of these people are going to break and start talking. So, I mean, it's quite possible that was, a factor and another reason not for coming back to Ireland.
And Anna was pregnant as well. I mean, the murder of a couple is highly unusual, at any time. What was the kind of circumstances behind all that, or suspected to be?
Well, look, I mean, as Willie Maughan's, as his father Joe explains it, he basically wanted out, and they'd been living in a trailer in that yard in Gormanston, and more or less had kind of said, like, we're getting out of here, we're going back to Tallaght to live there, going to start a new life, going to settle down with Anna. I mean, look, like Joe says himself that, Willie was no angel, as he puts it. He was part of the Price Maguire gang, and he was involved in, like, it is believed that he was involved in, acts of intimidation and some acts of violence. But that, Joe is adamant that they had wanted him to take part in murders and he refused. And it was for that reason then, as he, on the day that they were due to leave and due to be picked up, they disappeared, were never seen again. The theory is that they were beaten to death with hammers, both couple, that she couldn't be left alive either. And that their bodies were disposed of. And there's various theories as to how they were disposed of. Initially, they were talking about they were dumped in water. Now there's theories that they were buried in various locations. Or whether or not they were dismembered, or I mean, look, there's a huge amount of speculation as to what happened. But there are people out there who know. Like Cornelius Price isn't the only person who had that secret.
That story alone is, a measure of how terrifying that gang and under Cornelius Price's rule were. And, obviously there's remnants left. Just because he's dead doesn't mean that the others won't continue to associate with one another. But, I mean, it's such a disconnect, that story, from the guy who is so loved by his family, and he's buried in this way, and he's called a king and a legend and all these things. And you find that, I think, a lot in gangland when you delve into these individuals who are, so feared, and then they have this other total side to them, which is a loving family and like a father or a husband or a really loyal parent.
I mean, I always remember people that I knew and people that I spoke to talking about Paddy Doyle, who was probably the most feared criminal in Dublin's underworld, associate of Fat Freddie Thompson and Gary Hutch, and very high level criminals suspected of a number of murders. And I spoke to people who always said he was so quiet and sort of shy and nice and always had a kind word. And even April Collins, when she was giving evidence, and she spoke about Ger Dundon and her being over there in Spain with him and saying, oh no, he always tried to intervene if Ger was bullying me or anything like that.
Paddy Doyle did.
Yeah.
He tried to stick up for her.
He tried to stick up for her. However, people will tell you the other side, that he was absolutely ruthless, cold and violent. So people can, of course, it's no surprise. People have two sides. So they can kind of, I suppose, compartmentalize what they do in their lives as a gangster to how they behave as a family. I think, though, over time, people disassociate parts of themselves and act in a certain way. But I think there's the problem comes, and why you see so many gangland criminals struggle with mental health is because you can't keep that up forever. One side tends to interfere with the other. And it's really only the massively antisocial people that keep going.
Well, I think you figure out your own kind of structure for justifying what you do. And a good example of that was the N7 funerals. You remember the 3 men that were killed in a stolen car, drove into a head-on crash with a truck at City West. That was, I think, Dean Maguire was kind of the main funeral. There was quite a lot of controversy at the time. I know that a lot of talk radio going on about it. And it was like the family or the people who were, at the funeral, the mourners, not necessarily the family, but their supporters were very much normalizing, what he did for a living, which was a prolific burglary gang is what they were. And they had, symbols of his life, which we all know, we often see at a funeral in Ireland, and somebody brings up, symbols of your loved one's life, and it's a football shirt, and it's and a hurley, and maybe, I don't know, something to do with horse racing or something like that if you're in Kildare. But in this case, it was a torch, a screwdriver, cigarettes, a hat, newspapers, keys, his Canada Goose jacket, and a reg plate. Yeah. So I mean, the idea, and these were like giant outsized kind of screwdrivers using for basically breaking open window locks and getting into properties. So they were celebrating these, like,
so they were proud enough to bring these, and these were brought to these were the floral tributes that were brought to the altar.
Yeah, and there was it was actually both. Yeah.
You're right. So I mean, I suppose
so. We're back there slightly. The church and the priests being slightly compromised by all this in some way. I mean, what rights or rules do they have? I know Archbishop Dermot Martin at one point suggested that a ban on gangland funerals was something that should be brought in, but said it was just too difficult to police because it was up to the individual priests. And you have a priest in a church, and I mean, they are scary people that
Absolutely.
are coming in and demanding you do this. And you'd be very brave to stand up and say, "I'm sorry now, but you're having none of this. You can take your screwdrivers and your reg plates, and you can replace them with something more Christian."
But you're presuming a priest knows as well that the screwdriver could be implicated in for some other.
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, like if somebody was a well-known electrician, I mean, no, I mean, you're laughing, but like it might have happened,
I know, yeah.
I mean, there could be legitimate reasons, but like as well as that, like there was some wild behaviour that was associated with those funerals, which you've seen since in other cases, like young kids on scramblers, doing wheelies,
that's an
on the public
absolute
roads, and it's crazy stuff. Like it really is.
But that's a constant feature now. The kids doing on the scrambler bikes, doing skids and stuff like that, and some cars as well. I mean, we've seen that most recently at a funeral in Ballyfermot, that there was a flashpoint and there was a confrontation with the Gardaí. We saw during James Whelan's, in the advance of James Whelan's funeral. He's one I want to
talk about, James Whelan's funeral, because I mean, that really was a different level.
Yeah.
And in a way, so I was going to ask you both, do you think, okay, James Whelan is one of the younger members of this sort of fingless, flashy grouping, that sort of Gucci gang we talk about. He's fallen out with Mr. Flashy. He's out there, really puffed up and making his mark. He's only young. He's shot dead. He's buried in a gold coffin. There's professionally shot footage of the entire funeral. Professional shoots as in camera stuff is expensive. It's expensive to put that together.
Starts off with drone footage, and the family are very close up pictured as they're carrying the coffin.
They've almost a starring role in this, which 100%. Has become almost a movie of the funeral.
Yes, and there would be huge expense involved. And again, I think it's trying to reclaim the reputation of the person that shot dead, and it's also that element of celebration becomes a big part of it, because you could see in the aftermath of James Whelan's burial, they had a cardboard cutout of him, they were having drinks afterwards, as most people do at funerals, but they had a cardboard cutout with him, and people were dancing with the cardboard cutout.
That's not like what most people do, though.
No,
I don't know if I've ever been at a funeral with a cardboard cutout of the person who's buried.
Not yet. But yeah, so I mean, it's a kind of an embrace of that. I
mean, we've seen it with like other Irish families who aren't involved in crime, where it's been stepped up. Like like there was a relation of celebrity Paddy O'Doherty's, and they had a funeral in the UK, and there was 10 Rolls Royce hired to bring mourners along. I mean, there was another guy recently, they hired stunt planes to trail the Irish flag tricolour over the funeral home in smoke. And then before he left Liverpool, it was actually a banner in his name, you're a legend. So I mean, like
Tell us about Joe Dolan, my favourite story.
The game has been up. Well, it's a lovely story in one sense. There was another Irish family, well, a UK family with Irish roots, whose the dad was a huge Joe Dolan fan, and again, it was one of these hugely ornate graveside memorials, and it was making headlines in the UK. But one of the little features on the grave was actually a jukebox with a Joe Dolan CD, so that anyone who came to pay tribute to Big Willie Collins, I believe is his name.
Yeah.
Anyone who came to pay tribute could listen to Joe Dolan sing.
Solar powered as well, so it was actually.
So was that left there forever?
Yeah.
So there's no one nicked that.
Yeah.
No, it's solar powered.
A solar powered jukebox.
Yeah.
No, it's a small. It's a small little. I guess a CD player.
Well, it's a big
screwed to the ground.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at it again to see if it is, but it's built into the marble. It's built into the massive.
It's built into it, yeah.
Built into the massive marble thing.
And these marble graves are cost a fortune.
Yeah.
Obviously, the in Wexford Cemetery there, where Fat Andy Connors is buried. Myself and Ernie actually were down there after he was murdered in 2014. Andy Connors, and you'll tell us a little bit about him, Eamon, in a minute. He was another prolific burglar, although his family would say different. But he was shot dead in the house in Saggart and died in his wife's arms. And he was buried down in Gorey in the cemetery. And I think it was kind of some months afterwards we realised that they were going to go for something big and ornate. He was buried in like a gold-plated coffin with a Rolex on his arm that was worth God knows how much. And they sort of did celebrate the money he had made through some horrific crimes really over the years. But anyway, myself and Ernie went down a couple of months afterwards to see what they were doing with the grave. Maybe it was coming up to the anniversary. And as we were at the graveyard, there was this crane, okay? And I thought, what are they doing? And I looked and they were winching about 12 or 14 foot statues of Jesus, Mary and Joseph across the graveyard, right? Onto his marble tomb.
Yeah.
And I mean, we just got there it was just an extraordinary vision. I think we ran the photographs of the thing, them being winched across. Wouldn't have been my scene, but then they had it all. They had the grave, they had his name chiseled in. I think big, fat, rich Andy Connors was his name on the thing with these giant big marble statues. I mean, it cost 150, 200,000 for the grave.
Like we were writing about it in the Sunday World 20 plus years ago. Like there was hundreds of thousands being spent on graves of, clan patriarchs in the west of Ireland. Certainly, some of the Rathkeil Rovers for years were doing the same. There was, kind of giant rosary beads. Where the really like football sized beads on them. Yeah. Like looped around the grave, and and I remember
is
trying.
That
I remember
a
trying to.
Thing, or is that
it's a show? It's a show of devotion, and but look, I mean, you can say that about you can say that about the Sistine Chapel. Is it about religion or is it about devotion? So I mean, you can't really look. It is about religion, but it's also about devotion, and it's about showing it off. And for certainly for some people, it's sibling rivalry. It's I'm going to have a bigger grave than you because I'm more successful and I'm better than you, or I'm held in better esteem. So that goes on, and it's not limited. Like that's if you go to graveyards, you'll find 200-year-old Celtic crosses like that are 10 foot tall. That was put there because some local merchant didn't like the fact that the born into wealth aristocracy used to look down on him. So at least in death, he was going to have the biggest cross in the cemetery. So I mean, there's an element of that always went on.
We built. If you go to Glasnevin, you'll see all the Patriot dead have elaborate mausoleums built over them, and I suppose from our perspective, that's justified, but maybe it's just a lack of perspective that we have,
And I suppose also it depends on your belief system and what you believe happens after death, which would bring us maybe to Mexico. Yeah. Because I was just, I mean, anybody who can Google there, just have a look at some of this stuff in the Jardín del Humaya, which is a cemetery outside Culiacán, where a lot of the former members, the deceased cartel members from the Sinaloa cartel are buried. Now, they have these enormous kind of tombs. And just some of the things I noted down that they have in them, right? A bridal suite, a cinema. These narcos have fully working kitchens in their tombs, right? There's one guy has air conditioning in the bedrooms, in 2 bedrooms, so he's obviously going to get up out of the grave or whatever, and he'll need a little bit of cooling down in the bedrooms. Another fella has a burglar alarm on his. Right?
Yeah.
And, a lot of them have been killed in rows with the Mexican army or by rival cartels. But this entire cemetery is like, they're trying to outdo one another in death. But obviously there must be some belief that you're going to be rattling around these tombs
if you look
in the middle of the night or something.
It's not dissimilar than the Egyptian pyramids, who also had burglar alarms of a type, didn't they? And but one of the more disturbing developments, I think, is the attacks on graves that are happening again and again now. I mean, that's probably always to a degree happened, but I think that's become another feature of gangland. I mean, not so just earlier this year or late last year, we had Graham Carey, known as the Canary, who was shot dead in the South Inner City. There was footage put up on social media of his grave being attacked, vandalised, smashed up by a group of young criminals who had fallen out with him, obviously. And there have been other ones in recent times, so it's another feature of a way to attack the. And
what is that in aid of? Is it to kind of attack the family? Why? What's the point?
I suppose it's trying to undermine what they're trying to achieve it in the first place. It's trying to undermine the projection of power, saying, look, this is a pointless demonstration of your power because we can just smash up your grave. So it's not business, it's feuding, in that sense. I mean, and it has gone on for a while. I mean, I was looking this up before we came on to talk about this, but it's nearly 20 years ago I spoke to the widow of John Ryan, who was one of the victims in the Limerick feud that went on. He was shot dead in March 2003, and I spoke to her in, I think it was January the following year, and they had basically had constant threats that his body was going to be dug out and dumped on her doorstep. The local cemetery had graffiti sprayed or painted on the wall to that effect, and also who shot JR. It was taunting the family. So it wasn't enough that they had killed him, but they also wanted they wanted to, I suppose, psychologically
his memory or something.
But also kind of they psychologically beat the family into submission that they're no longer going to be an issue. And I mean, like John Ryan's brother Eddie Ryan was an enforcer. We spoke about this quite recently, I think just this week, Nicola.
Yeah.
But he was an enforcer for Christy Keane, and he was one of the first murders in the whole thing that set off the feud. So John Ryan, to some extent, was shot dead because there was fears that he might come looking for revenge, and wasn't a particularly major criminal at all. And was, I think a lot of people would have the view that he was very much an innocent kind of target in the whole thing. It was simply because of his family connections. And yet his widow was put through this absolute torture, And again, it's just about it's really trying to screw someone over totally. So it's not enough that you kill, a person, that you also got to, you have to bring on the terror, which is what these murders are often about. It's about trying to terrorize your enemies into submission, into silence.
And have any of them sort of considered maybe getting security around the graves or anything like that? Is there?
I don't know, but there have been CCTV cameras actually put up on a lot of these things, really? as they've repeatedly happened. There have been other attacks, even back to Martin de General Cahill. His gravestone was smashed up a couple of times, but I mean, it's a feature in other countries as well. I mean, Frank Costello, who we spoke about, one of the founding members of the modern US mafia. Even after he died, he had a big mausoleum, and some guy actually blew it up, put an actual bomb under it because after post-death, he hated him in life. He died of natural causes. He couldn't get around to killing him, so he just blew up his graveside. So I think it's about trying to make sure that the families and the associates don't get this kind of, aren't allowed a kind of hero worship.
They can't have a martyr.
They can't have a martyr. They're still going to show that nothing is sacred.
I think, though, at the other end, I think of some of the criminal feuding that goes on, the reason why in some cemeteries and some graves are attacked, it's simply to cause economic damage to somebody can't really afford to replace. 50 grand's worth of marble, so you smash it up. And I mean, we've seen that like quite recently in the Midlands and in Ennis, where there was graves smashed up, and then there was another one. A lot of combustible material was put on the grave and set alight and filmed at night. You had a grave in Mullingar that was broken up on the orders of Owen Maguire, on the basis that a relative of that person had made some kind of insult about him being a cripple. As we know, he's paralysed and in a wheelchair since he was shot by Robbie Lawler. And a lot of that it's about punishment, as well. So it's not always, as we were talking about, or as I was talking about, the projection of power and the attempts to undermine it. Sometimes it's just smashing up someone's car or burning someone's house out just to try and put them out of business or to distract them or give them something else to worry about. And of course, it's upsetting. It's going to be upsetting. Like, the person who's going to get blamed for being the reason behind why the grave is attacked has to face their relatives and say, look, it's got nothing to do with me. And saying, yes, it is. You're the guy involved in crime. And, we're the ones who have to pick up the pieces. So you're going to have to deal with, upset mothers and sisters or brothers or whatever, because of your involvement in something. So, I mean, it's a way of trying to upset people at that level, So, I mean, there's different motivations.
And speaking of Brendan Maguire, I think he did show up at Cornelius Price's funeral. He was attending. And he obviously he was shot as well, along with his brother, but he wasn't left as badly injured from it.
No, he's been out of the country for an extended period, living in the UK.
He actually lives in the area where he was buried. I mean, that came out in the recent... Yeah, he's in, I think, Manchester, not too far away.
Eamon would have... I mean, he was featured in a cab case you covered there in recent weeks, Eamon?
Yeah, I mean, well, that was over himself and Owen Maguire and the land, and I think it was whatever it was, about 300,000 in cash. But his address came out of that. So I mean, like,
this was the cash that they found in the attic of the home in Drogheda in Cement Road when they raided it at some point.
That's right. Yeah. And then that was. I think it was just before he was shot, and then of course the van that he just got out of when Owen Maguire was shot, that was seized as well. But I mean that was the main the main kind of, I suppose, asset, and there was a few. I think there was 2 kind of derelict rural houses that were seized as well. But I mean, they went through the whole.
Was Cornelius Price ever targeted by the Criminal Assets Bureau?
It certainly didn't come to court anyway.
Yeah.
It's quite. I mean, he was in prison, I guess. Up until 2019, that time. So he was a little bit out of the picture. I mean, it's quite possible that they'd go after it, and it just hasn't come to court. We haven't heard about it. I mean, I'd be surprised if they haven't.
Good patch of land up there in Gormanston, and obviously, if he owns it, if it's in his name, given all that went on there, it would be nice to see it coming into the ownership of the state at some point. But what I wanted to ask you was the likes of Cornelius Price and the life he led, and, the fear he instilled in people, and then he's buried as this sort of hero. What did he accomplish? What sort of wealth did he... This is a very deep question, but, what did he accomplish? I mean, you think about... I've been to a few funerals recently, and there is that sense of, you go, what did this person accomplish in life? And obviously some people have lived long lives and have had a lot of love and stuff around them. But
in a way, you could say he held office for a while. He was the main drug dealer in the northeast of the country, in Drogheda, maybe into some parts of North County Dublin, Louth and Meath and all that. So someone else is now. So that's what he contributed. It was like being Taoiseach for 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe not a particularly good one, or maybe he was very successful. He was certainly very violent, made a lot of headlines. So, I mean, whoever the new incumbent is... Does he have a legacy
to leave? Does he have anything... have we any idea what kind of money he would have made over the time?
There was a famous economics paper where these economists from Harvard followed these drug dealers for a year, and I think the paper was called "Why Do All Drug Dealers Live with Their Mothers?"
This was in Freakonomics.
Yes,
I know it exactly. Yes, because they worked out exactly how much they earned per hour,
which is roughly what you'd earn at McDonald's.
Yeah, that's
the criminals like Cornelius Price may well have earned more. But he
was the franchisee holder, but everyone around him would have been better off working in a fast food restaurant
because they get bursts of money.
Yeah,
but they're not in it for the money. They're in it for the ego and for being the big shot. And that's the reality of criminality for the vast majority of people. You can pick out Daniel and Christy Kinahan, who are different, but most of them are earning far, far less than the hassle they create.
And taking enormous risks, really, with it. And then, obviously,
mostly being killed or ending up in prison. So it's not driven by finance, I think, for the 99.9% of them are doing it to be big shots. But he leaves a legacy of his own family, like all of us, and maybe they'll have different memories. And
he also leaves a legacy of anguish and pain for members of Benny Whitehouse's family and the Mawns, like, who are still dealing with their loss. So I mean, it does go beyond him. I don't think it's a particularly attractive legacy or a nice legacy at all.
It's not a nice legacy, and even for his family, like they're battling now to put out, this guy's a legend and a hero and a king. But even in that, they're having to read posts on social media, posts in newspapers, not allowing that reputation to be uncontested. So they leave a legacy that is dust. Is that what the phrase is?
Well, don't forget, I mean, Daniel Kinahan was attempting to do that, before his death, and when he was, on the cusp of having successfully whitewashed sports washed his reputation as a drug dealer, and that came close to it, and it was the likes of the Underworld and some of the other Irish newspapers and one or two of the boxing writers who stuck to their guns, and made sure that the Kinahan wasn't getting a free ride publicity wise, and it did knock him back a bit. But I mean, the real thing that knocked him back, of course, was the US sanctions. Yeah. I mean, which was the guards working behind the scenes, like, lobbying for this.
Absolutely, yeah, and calling out to them. I suppose, in a way, a funeral is the one time that gangsters are guaranteed to be,
uncontested.
No, they're going to be photographed. They're going to be in the media.
Yeah.
That and when they're in court. There are two times that they know for sure that there's going to be some media attention around them. And in a way, I wonder, is that a little bit of it as well? Is it not just for fellow gangsters?
I think they show a message. If you look at, we've spoken about David Byrne's funeral, like the display that was put on there, Daniel and Christy Jr. flying back.
That was a media event, essentially,
that was
as
a media
well.
Event, and it contrasted very directly with the Hutch funerals that occurred at the same time, which were deliberately wound down, low key. None of that display of wealth. They really didn't want to put on that display of show of power and strength, obviously because of they were under such threat and fear. Where the David Byrne funeral was the opposite sign, and that. I mean, I think that's the last. Was it the last time Daniel and Christy Jr. were in the country, or around that time?
It was
anyway,
the last time. And you know what it was as well. I suppose really a final point about funerals and gangland funerals and all the rest of it. They are often fertile grounds for intelligence gathering. Of course, at the David Byrne funeral, who was standing at the back, but a guy we'd later find out was nicknamed Mr. Nobody.
Yeah.
Declan Brady, and he wasn't necessarily on the radar. There are places where you can see who's friends, who isn't, who shows up, who doesn't, who's a bit afraid.
There's a long tradition in Irish gangland as well of people who've ordered murders showing up for the funerals of the people that they've had killed to deny they had anything to do with it. Not least Eamon Dunn, known as the Don, had a tendency to do that, to show up to the funeral and say, oh God, it's terrible, he was killed, a couple of days after ordering a murder.
There's one other, slightly off topic in terms of gangland funerals, but one that the kind of lower level criminals again have been involved in recently, and it's happened twice, where the funeral cortège, say wherever they're going from, they'll stop at the prison where there might be relatives, and they will make lots of noise, sing and dance, stand on the walls or get as close as they can, and hang around, have a drink even, and kind of make sure that somebody in the nearest wing to the wall is able to hear what's going on. So there, there's a kind of final farewell to the guys inside.
Get the hearse up to Limerick prison wall.
Yeah, there was that, and the one outside Portlaoise prison as well. And for John O'Donoghue's benefit, that was one of the Rackheelers done for. What was he done for again? I'm trying to remember now. But he got a 10-year sentence for attacking a 70-something-year-old man with a machete, and pretty much, he's a convicted drug dealer as well. But I mean, so there was one of his close pals had passed away, and they kind of made a tribute by turning up outside the high security to shout and make a bit of noise and allow him to process the farewell.
It's kind of like the whole gangland and the criminality and in life and in death. It's almost like a culture now, isn't it? It's
but
it's got its own identity.
Yeah, it's a counterculture. I mean, that is the truth. And if you compare it, Eamon has brought up the IRA funerals. Like, there was another culture where IRA guys were heroes, were patriots, were freedom fighters, were pillars of the community. That was a counterculture that exists really, really strongly, within a community. And obviously then the main culture was the IRA were terrorists, killers, beyond the pale. And so that does exist in Irish society now, where you see with the burglary gang guys that Eamon referred to, there is a counterculture that is there where, people could argue, sure, the same counterculture exists with maybe bankers in Ireland or other people, maybe they could look at them and say, bankers can be celebrated when they die, even though they've done this. But that is there, and that counterculture is not reached by us preaching in the Sunday World, for example.
But the culture is seeping more and more, I think, in with the younger gangs, this whole... the kind of the TikTok culture, I suppose, the idea of them showing off that wealth, which is around a good while now. But that is very much a Mexican thing.
Yeah.
That has, been going on there for a long, long time. The kind of the gold-plated guns, the absolute bling, the and I think exotic animals and all that sort of stuff. And it's like that. You're just seeing it more and more with what should be ordinary drug gangs, the younger ones.
But there's also a huge reinforcement for the younger members of the gang. Like, it's going to be a really emotional moment. It's going to be a time to bond even closer, possibly even recruit new people, like, who show up for the funeral. So, it's like any good organised crime gang is going to have tight emotional bonds between people that can be exploited then by the people in charge. And that's why you would have had, say, football hooligan gangs that, evolved into serious cocaine dealing gangs in the UK, because they all went out and fought the police together. So you got to know who you could trust, and you went for a drink afterwards, had a laugh, maybe started going out with each other's sisters or whatever, and they become a family. And so some of these gangs, for some people, that is their family, and that's what they're doing. So for having a big send-off, and it's about their family, it's not about the blood family, it's not about the brothers and sisters who mightn't be involved in crime. It's about the brothers who are in the gang.
But I think social media allows that counterculture to display itself, broadcast itself, and to stay internal, like echo chambers they're talking about, with QAnon or anything else. Social media.
They're owning their own counterculture more so than in the past, when it was the media was looking at what it was, and
it had to be reflected. They were now it can be self-contained.
Yeah. Yeah. Cornelius Price, is that the end of him? I know he's dead, right? I don't mean it that way, but I mean, is that the last we've heard of him?
I doubt very much. I mean, there is unsolved murders yet to be dealt with. I've no doubt someone's going to come forward, over the murder of Willie Vaughan and Anna Farsalevin. So, I mean, I don't think so.
And this grave, now that it's known to be in Rochdale, and obviously the fear was always that it was, the funeral was going to be hijacked, or that
it's very possible to be an attack on it. I mean, like some of his rivals have been gloating. We've already seen that, when they've put up stuff on TikTok and other social media, basically making fun of the family, trying to whitewash his reputation, like in following his death. So I mean,
but those gangs have really been diminished by the Gardaí, it has to be said, and obviously by the feuding that has gone on. So in a way, it just shows you that these gangs that are very violent and spring up, they can be maybe never dismantled fully, but they can certainly have be brought to heel, which I think has happened, in fairness, in Drogheda. Criminality will still exist and drug dealing, but the power that they had is diminished.
And that at least is a good thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicola. Can I go
now? You can. You can go now and do whatever it is you want to do. Drink your pints on a Friday afternoon.